The morning sun cast a golden glow over Kensington Palace as Princess Kate stood before her bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting the delicate pearl earrings that had once belonged to Princess Diana. Today was not just any day. It was the day that would mark a new chapter in British history, and she knew that millions of eyes around the world would be watching every move her family made. In the adjoining room, she could hear the gentle murmur of voices as the children's nanny helped Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis prepare for what would undoubtedly be one of the most significant days of their young lives. The weight of tradition and expectation hung in the air like morning mist, but Kate had learned over the years to transform nervous energy into graceful composure. Prince William emerged from his dressing room, resplendent in his formal military uniform, the blue sash of the Order of the Garter crossing his chest with dignified elegance. His face carried the same mix of anticipation and solemnity that Kate had come to recognize on important state occasions. They had been through many such events together, but this one felt different, more personal, more momentous. "The cars will be here in 20 minutes, William said softly, approaching his wife and placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Are you ready for this?" Kate turned to face him, her own outfit, a flowing cream-colored dress with intricate embroidered detailing that caught the morning light, rustling softly with the movement. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," she replied with a smile that managed to be both confident and slightly nervous at the same time. The sound of children's laughter drifted down the hallway, and both parents exchanged a knowing look. George, at 10 years old, had been briefed extensively about the ceremony and his role in it. Charlotte, 8, had been practicing her curtsy for weeks, much to her brother's amusement, and Louis, at 5, had been promised his favorite biscuits if he could sit still during the longest parts of the service. "Mummy, does my bow tie look straight?" George appeared in the doorway, his small hands fumbling with the navy silk tie that completed his miniature formal suit. Kate knelt down to his level, her practiced fingers making the final adjustments while her eyes met his serious gaze. "Perfect," she said, straightening his jacket lapels. "Remember what we talked about yesterday?" George nodded solemnly. "Walk slowly. Keep my hands at my sides and remember that everyone is watching not just me but what I represent." William felt a surge of pride mixed with sympathy for his eldest son. The boy was growing up faster than any child should have to, bearing responsibilities that most adults never face. But George handled it all with a maturity that sometimes amazed both his parents. Charlotte appeared next, spinning in her pale blue dress with white lace trim, her hair perfectly styled in soft curls that framed her face. "Do I look like a proper princess?" she asked with the confidence of a child who knew she looked lovely but wanted the confirmation anyway. "You look absolutely beautiful, darling," Kate said, catching her daughter mid-spin and planting a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Just like a real princess should. I'm a real princess." "Mummy," Charlotte replied with 8-year-old logic that made both parents chuckle despite the tension of the morning. The last to join them was Louis, his usually unruly hair tamed into something resembling neatness, though Kate suspected it wouldn't stay that way for long. He was clutching a small toy car that he'd been told he absolutely could not bring to Westminster Abbey, but somehow always ended up in his pocket anyway. "Right then, car or no car, Louis?" William asked, extending his hand to his youngest son. Louis looked down at the toy, then up at his father's expectant face, and finally over to his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod. With a dramatic sigh that seemed far too mature for his 5 years, he placed the car on a nearby table. "I'll save it for when we get home," he announced with the air of someone making a great sacrifice. As the family made their way down the grand staircase of their residence, Kate couldn't help but reflect on how much their lives had changed since William's grandmother had passed away. The children had adapted to their new roles with remarkable grace, though she knew they didn't fully understand the magnitude of what lay ahead, not just today, but for the rest of their lives. The sound of car doors slamming outside indicated that their transportation had arrived. A fleet of official vehicles waited in the courtyard, their black paintwork gleaming in the morning sun. Security personnel moved with quiet efficiency, checking and double-checking every detail while trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible. Kate took one last look in the hallway mirror, adjusting her hat, a wide-brimmed creation adorned with subtle feathers and a small diamond brooch, and checking that her makeup was still perfect. The morning had been carefully choreographed down to the minute, with hair and makeup artists arriving before dawn to ensure everything was flawless. "Time to go," William said, though his voice carried a note of something Kate couldn't quite identify. Pride, nervousness, perhaps a mixture of both. As they stepped outside, the familiar sounds of London seemed somehow more distant, as if the entire city was holding its breath in anticipation. The children walked in formation, George beside his father, Charlotte holding Kate's hand and Louis between them, his small fingers intertwined with his mother's free hand. The journey to Westminster Abbey would take them through streets lined with thousands of people who had been waiting since before sunrise for just a glimpse of the royal family. Kate knew that by the time they arrived at the Abbey, every photograph, every gesture, every expression would be analyzed and discussed around the world. But for now, in these final moments of relative privacy, she allowed herself to simply be a mother, a wife, and a woman about to witness history in the making. The carriage doors closed with a soft click, and their journey to Westminster Abbey began. The motorcade glided through the streets of London like a river of black elegance, each vehicle positioned with military precision. Inside the lead car, Kate watched through tinted windows as crowds of people lined every street, their faces bright with excitement and anticipation. Many held small British flags that fluttered in the gentle morning breeze, while others raised phones and cameras, hoping to capture a moment they could treasure forever. Prince George sat quietly beside his father, his young face pressed against the window as he took in the unprecedented scenes outside. Kate could see him trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. The thousands of people, the barriers held by police officers, the news crews positioned at strategic intervals along their route. "There are so many people, Papa," George whispered, his voice filled with wonder rather than anxiety. William placed a reassuring hand on his son's knee. "They're all here because they care about our family and our country," he explained gently. "Some of them have been waiting out here all night, just to see us pass by." Charlotte, ever the more social of the children, had her face glued to her window as well, occasionally lifting her small hand to wave at groups of children she spotted in the crowd. Her natural instinct to connect with people shone through even in this formal setting, and Kate could see several families pointing excitedly and waving back at her daughter. "Can they see me through the glass, Mummy?" Charlotte asked, her breath fogging the window slightly. "They can see your shape, sweetheart, but not clearly," Kate replied, smoothing down her daughter's hair. "Save your best waves for when we get out at the Abbey." Louis had been remarkably well behaved for the first part of the journey, but Kate could see the familiar signs that his patience was beginning to wear thin. His small legs were swinging back and forth, and he had started that particular fidgeting motion with his hands that usually preceded a request for snacks or entertainment. "How much longer until we get there?" Louis asked, though his tone was more curious than complaining. "Just a few more minutes, darling," Kate said, checking the time on her elegant watch. "And remember, when we arrive, there will be lots of cameras and people wanting to take our picture." The route to Westminster Abbey had been planned to take them past some of London's most iconic landmarks, giving the crowds multiple opportunities to see the royal family, while also showcasing the beauty of the historic city. As they passed Buckingham Palace, Kate felt a familiar tug of emotion, remembering all the family gatherings and state occasions that had taken place within those walls. Through their security details' radio communications, they could hear updates about crowd sizes and road conditions. The enthusiasm of the public had exceeded all expectations, with estimates suggesting that over 1 million people had gathered along the route and around Westminster Abbey. The logistical challenge of managing such crowds while ensuring the safety of the royal family required coordination between multiple security agencies. "Look there, children." William pointed out his window toward a group of school children who had been given special positions near the roadside. They were wearing matching blue uniforms and holding a large banner that read, "Welcome to History," in colorful letters. "Those children are probably the same ages as you." Charlotte immediately perked up at this observation. "Do you think they're nervous too?" she asked with the honest simplicity that often caught her parents off guard. Kate exchanged a meaningful look with William. It was easy to forget sometimes that despite their training and preparation, their children were still just children, experiencing very normal emotions about a very extraordinary day. "I think everyone's a little nervous today," Kate said honestly. "Even Mama and Papa have butterflies in our stomachs." but being nervous just means something is important to us. The convoy began to slow as they approached the final stretch leading to Westminster Abbey. Through the windscreen,
Kate could see the ancient spires of the abbey rising against the morning sky.
their Gothic architecture a testament to nearly 1,000 years of British history. The sight never failed to move her, but today it seemed especially profound. Security personnel on motorcycles had moved ahead to clear the final approach, and Kate could see the red carpet that had been rolled out leading to the Abbey's main entrance. Television crews had positioned themselves at strategic angles to capture every moment of their arrival, while photographers with long telephoto lenses waited behind carefully placed barriers. "Right, everyone," William said, his voice taking on a slightly more formal tone as he prepared his family for the transition from private moment to public spectacle. "Remember what we practiced. Walk slowly, smile naturally, and don't worry about looking at all the cameras." George straightened his shoulders and checked his bow tie one final time. Charlotte smoothed down her dress and practiced her smile. Louis, perhaps sensing the shift in mood, became unusually still and attentive. The car came to a gentle stop, and Kate could hear the roar of the crowd even through the vehicle's soundproofing. The noise was incredible. Thousands of voices calling out greetings, cheering, and expressing their excitement. Camera shutters clicked like rainfall, creating a constant backdrop of sound that would accompany every step they took. A security officer appeared at William's door, giving a subtle nod to indicate that everything was ready for their emergence. Kate took one final moment to check her reflection in her compact mirror, ensuring that her lipstick was perfect and her hat was positioned correctly. "Ready?" William asked, his hand on the door handle. Kate reached over and straightened Louis's collar, then gave Charlotte's hand a gentle squeeze. "Ready," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the excitement building in her chest. The door opened, and the sounds of the crowd immediately intensified. Camera flashes created a strobe light effect as William stepped out first, his military uniform catching the light as he turned to help his family from the car. The cheers grew louder as each member of the family appeared, with particular enthusiasm greeting the children's arrival. Kate emerged with practiced grace, her cream-colored dress flowing elegantly as she stood and adjusted her hat. The morning breeze caught the fabric slightly, creating a picture-perfect moment that photographers scrambled to capture. She could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, but years of public appearances had taught her to transform that pressure into poise. The red carpet beneath their feet seemed to stretch endlessly toward the towering entrance of Westminster Abbey, its deep crimson color a stark contrast to the ancient stone walls that had witnessed so many coronations throughout British history. Kate felt the familiar sensation of hyper-awareness that came with major public events. Every sound seemed amplified, every color more vivid, every movement more deliberate. Prince George stepped out of the car with remarkable composure for a 10-year-old, his small frame carrying itself with the same dignified bearing his father had mastered over decades of public life. The crowd's reaction to seeing him was particularly warm, with many people calling out his name and expressing their delight at watching him grow into his role as future heir to the throne. Charlotte emerged next, and Kate couldn't suppress a small smile as her daughter immediately began waving at the crowd with the natural enthusiasm that had endeared her to the British public since birth. Unlike her more reserved older brother, Charlotte seemed to draw energy from the attention, her face lighting up as she spotted children her own age among the spectators. Louis, the youngest and often the most unpredictable of the three, surprised everyone by walking with unusual solemnity between his parents. Kate had prepared herself for the possibility of tantrums or fatigue, but her youngest son seemed to understand instinctively that this moment required his best behavior. The family began their procession up the red carpet, each step carefully measured and deliberate. Kate had practiced this walk countless times, knowing that every photograph would be scrutinized and every gesture analyzed. The key was to appear natural and relaxed while maintaining the regal bearing expected of senior members of the royal family. Security personnel flanked their path, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd while trying to remain as invisible as possible. Kate had learned to trust completely in their expertise, allowing her to focus on the moment rather than worry about logistics or safety concerns. "Wave to the lady in the blue hat, Charlotte," Kate whispered softly to her daughter, having spotted an elderly woman who was clearly overcome with emotion at seeing the royal family up close. Charlotte immediately turned toward the woman and gave her a special wave, causing the lady to press her hand to her heart in delight. The entrance to Westminster Abbey loomed larger as they approached, its massive doors thrown open to reveal the dimly lit interior beyond. Kate could see figures moving in the shadows, clergy members preparing for the service, television crews making final adjustments to their equipment, and guests taking their seats in preparation for the historic ceremony. "Look up there, children," William said quietly, gesturing toward the Abbey's magnificent Gothic arches. "This building has seen almost 1,000 years of British history. Kings and queens have been crowned here for centuries." George followed his father's gaze with obvious fascination, as someone who would one day be crowned in this very space. He seemed to be trying to absorb every detail, every stone, every piece of carved decoration that would one day frame his own coronation. The sound of organ music began to drift from within the Abbey, its rich, deep tones adding a sense of sacred gravitas to the proceedings. Kate recognized the piece, a traditional hymn that had been sung at coronations for generations, and felt a shiver of anticipation run down her spine. As they reached the entrance, they were greeted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, resplendent in his ceremonial robes. His warm smile helped to ease any lingering nervousness, and Kate was grateful for his calming presence. The children had met him several times during preparation sessions, and his familiar face in this sea of formality was reassuring. "Your Royal Highnesses," the Archbishop said with a respectful bow. "Welcome to this most joyous and sacred occasion." "Thank you, Your Grace," William replied formally, while the children performed the curtsies and bows they had practiced so diligently. The interior of Westminster Abbey was breathtaking. Hundreds of guests were already seated, their faces turning toward the royal family with expressions of respect and anticipation. The ancient stone walls seemed to glow in the carefully arranged lighting, while flowers in deep purples and golds decorated every available surface. Kate could see familiar faces among the congregation, foreign dignitaries, heads of state, celebrities, and representatives from various charitable organizations that the royal family supported. The diversity of the gathering was remarkable, representing not just British society, but the entire Commonwealth and beyond. As they walked down the aisle, Kate kept one eye on her children, ready to intervene if any of them showed signs of being overwhelmed. Charlotte seemed enchanted by the grandeur around her, her eyes wide as she took in the stained glass windows that cast colored light across the congregation. George maintained his serious expression, though Kate could see him stealing glances at the television cameras that were discreetly positioned throughout the Abbey. Louis, perhaps surprisingly, seemed the most at ease of the three children. His natural confidence appeared to be serving him well, and he walked with the same easy grace he displayed during family outings, seemingly unaware of the historic significance of the moment. The organ music swelled as they approached their designated seats in the front section of the Abbey. Kate could feel the weight of history around her. This was the same space where Queen Elizabeth II had been crowned decades earlier, where countless royal weddings and funerals had taken place, where the most significant moments in British royal history had unfolded. Their seats offered a perfect view of the altar area, where the central ceremony would take place. Kate helped the children settle into their positions, making sure Charlotte's dress was arranged properly, and that Louis was comfortable enough to sit still for the extended service ahead. "Remember," she whispered to all three children, "if you need anything during the service, just squeeze my hand quietly." The Abbey continued to fill with guests, each arrival marked by a subtle shift in the congregation's attention. Kate recognized many faces: politicians, religious leaders, representatives from the military, and members of various noble families. The carefully orchestrated seating arrangement reflected centuries of protocol and precedence. As they waited for the ceremony to begin, Kate allowed herself a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. Years of preparation, countless hours of instruction and practice, and the gradual assumption of ever greater responsibilities had all led to this moment. The children sat quietly beside her, their earlier nervousness having given way to fascination with their surroundings. George was studying the ornate ceiling with obvious interest, while Charlotte whispered quiet observations about the beautiful dresses worn by other female guests. Louis had discovered that his seat cushion made a very soft whooshing sound when he shifted his weight, though a gentle look from his mother quickly ended that particular investigation. The final guests were taking their seats now, and Kate could sense the building anticipation in the Abbey. Soon the ceremony would begin, and they would all become witnesses to a moment that would be remembered for generations to come. The atmosphere inside Westminster Abbey had transformed from anticipatory whispers to profound reverent silence as the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Kate felt her heart rate increase slightly as the massive organ began to play the opening chords of the processional hymn, its powerful notes reverberating through every stone arch and carved column of the ancient building. Prince Louis, who had been remarkably well behaved throughout the preliminary ceremonies, suddenly seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was happening around him. His small hand found Kate's and she gave it a reassuring squeeze while keeping her eyes focused on the altar, where the central ceremony was about to unfold. "It's starting, isn't it, Mummy?" Charlotte whispered so quietly that only Kate could hear her. "Yes, darling," Kate replied in the same hushed tone. "This is the moment we've all been waiting for." The procession began with representatives of the Commonwealth realms, each carrying symbols of their nations. Kate watched as flags and ceremonial items passed by their seats, representing countries and territories from around the globe. The children were mesmerized by the pageantry, their eyes following each colorful banner and ornate ceremonial object. George sat with perfect posture, his young face serious and attentive as he tried to absorb every detail of what he was witnessing. Kate knew that as the future heir to the throne, this ceremony held special significance for him. It was a preview of what awaited him many decades in the future. The choir's voices joined the organ music, filling the Abbey with sounds that seemed to transport everyone present back through centuries of British history. Kate had heard these hymns many times before, but never in circumstances quite like these. The acoustics of the ancient building gave every note a depth and richness that sent chills down her spine. "Look, Papa," George whispered to William, pointing discreetly toward the ornate ceremonial objects being carried past them. "Is that the same crown that will be used?" William nodded, his own voice barely audible as he replied, "That's the St. Edward's crown. It's over 350 years old and weighs nearly 5 pounds. Kate could see Charlotte doing mental calculations, probably trying to imagine how heavy 5 pounds would feel on her own small head. The practical nature of her daughter's thinking often provided moments of levity even during the most formal occasions. The ceremony proceeded, with ancient rituals that had been performed in this same location for nearly 1,000 years. Kate found herself thinking about all the queens who had sat in similar positions throughout history, watching their husbands being crowned, knowing that their own lives and their children's lives were being forever changed by these moments. As the religious portions of the service unfolded, Kate noticed how different members of their family were reacting to the solemnity of the occasion. William maintained the same dignified composure he displayed at all state functions, but she could see the emotion in his eyes as he watched traditions that connected him directly to his ancestors being performed. Louis had begun to fidget slightly, though he was still managing to keep his restlessness within acceptable bounds. Kate had come prepared with quiet distractions. A small book about British history with pictures that might keep him interested if his attention began to wander too much. The moment of the actual crowning approached, and Kate could feel the tension in the Abbey rising to an almost palpable level. Hundreds of guests leaned forward slightly in their seats, not wanting to miss a single second of the historic moment they were privileged to witness. "This is it," William whispered, though whether he was speaking to Kate or simply expressing his own amazement, she couldn't be sure. The Archbishop of Canterbury lifted the crown, its gold surface catching the light from hundreds of candles positioned throughout the Abbey. The gems embedded in its surface, sapphires, emeralds, and diamonds, sparkled like captured starlight as he held it high for all to see. Charlotte gasped softly at the sight, her 8-year-old mind clearly impressed by the crown's beauty and obvious importance. "It's so pretty," she whispered, earning a gentle smile from her mother. The actual moment of coronation seemed to exist outside of normal time. Kate watched as centuries of tradition culminated in this single transformative instant. The crown was placed, the oath was spoken, and suddenly the entire nature of their family's role in British society had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause that echoed through the Abbey's vaulted ceilings. Kate joined in the applause while keeping one eye on her children, all of whom were clapping enthusiastically. Even Louis seemed to understand that this was a moment for celebration. "God save the king," voices called out from throughout the abbey, the traditional cry taking on new meaning as it was applied for the first time in decades. Kate felt tears prick at her eyes as the full emotional weight of the moment hit her. The children looked around them with wonder as the celebration continued. George seemed particularly moved by the sight of grown adults, many of them world leaders and dignitaries, showing such open emotion and joy. For Charlotte and Louis, it was probably one of the most exciting things they had ever witnessed. As the formal ceremony concluded and the recessional began, Kate helped the children prepare to join the procession that would lead them back out into the London sunshine. The day was far from over. There would be appearances on the balcony, additional ceremonies, and countless photographs. But this central moment had been completed successfully. "How do you feel?" William asked Kate quietly as they prepared to stand and join the recessional. Kate considered the question carefully. How did she feel? Proud, certainly. Emotional, definitely. But also grateful. Grateful to have been present for such a historic moment. Grateful for her children's good behavior. And grateful for the opportunity to be part of something so much larger than herself. "Like we've just witnessed something that will be talked about for centuries," she replied, smoothing down Charlotte's dress one final time. The organ music swelled again as the recessional began, and the royal family took their designated place in the procession that would carry them back out into the world, where millions of people were waiting to celebrate this historic day with them. As they began to walk back down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, Kate couldn't help but think about how this day would be remembered by her children when they were adults with children of their own. Would they remember the weight of the crown, the sound of the cheers, the feeling of being part of something ancient and enduring? The sunlight seemed almost blindingly bright as the royal family emerged from the shadowy interior of Westminster Abbey. The contrast between the hushed reverence inside and the explosive celebration outside was remarkable. Thousands of voices cheering, cameras clicking incessantly, and the general atmosphere of a nation in the midst of joyful celebration. Kate blinked as her eyes adjusted to the daylight, instinctively reaching for Charlotte's hand to ensure her daughter stayed close during the transition from the controlled environment of the Abbey to the barely contained excitement of the crowds outside. The red carpet that had seemed so long on their arrival now appeared to offer insufficient distance between them and the overwhelming enthusiasm of the public. Prince George walked beside his father with newfound confidence, as if witnessing the coronation ceremony had somehow added years to his young life in the span of a few hours. His posture was straighter, his expression more thoughtful, and Kate could see him processing the magnitude of what he had just witnessed. "The crowd seem even larger now," William observed, his trained eye taking in the security arrangements and crowd control measures that had been implemented while they were inside the Abbey. "Look at all those flags." Indeed, the scene before them was a sea of red, white, and blue as thousands of Union Jacks waved in the afternoon breeze. Street vendors had been selling flags, commemorative items and snacks to the waiting crowds, turning the solemn occasion into something resembling a massive outdoor festival. Charlotte was practically bouncing with excitement as she took in the spectacle around them. "Can we wave back at them, Mummy?" she asked, already raising her small hand in preparation. "Of course, darling," Kate replied, beginning her own series of graceful waves toward different sections of the crowd. "Remember to look at different groups of people so everyone feels included." Louis, who had been remarkably patient during the lengthy ceremony, seemed to have gotten a second wind from the energy of the crowd. His earlier solemnity had given way to the natural exuberance of a 5-year-old, and Kate could see him preparing to wave with both hands despite the formal protocols they had practiced. The journey to their waiting vehicles was planned as a slower procession than their arrival, giving the public more opportunities to see the royal family and capture photographs. Kate had learned over the years to pace herself during these walkabouts, conserving energy while still engaging meaningfully with the crowds. "Your Royal Highness," voices called out from various sections of the crowd along with shouts of, "We love you," and "God save the King." The enthusiasm was infectious, and Kate found herself smiling more broadly than she had initially planned. A group of school children had been given special positions near the Abbey steps, and Charlotte immediately gravitated toward them when she spotted their colorful banners and excited faces. "Hello!" she called out to them, causing a ripple of excitement among the young spectators. She's a natural at this, William murmured to Kate, pride evident in his voice as he watched his daughter instinctively connect with people her own age. George, meanwhile, had noticed a veteran in military uniform among the crowd, and made a point of acknowledging him with a special wave and nod. The gesture was small but significant, showing that even at his young age, he understood the importance of recognizing service and sacrifice. The photographers positioned along their route were working frantically to capture every moment, every expression, every interaction. Kate had long ago learned to ignore the constant clicking of camera shutters, but she was always conscious of how the images would be perceived by the public and what stories they might tell. "Mummy, look at that lady's hat," Charlotte whispered, pointing discreetly toward a spectator wearing an enormous creation adorned with feathers, flowers, and what appeared to be a small replica of Big Ben. Kate followed her daughter's gaze and couldn't suppress a genuine laugh at the sight. "People get very creative for special occasions," she replied, making a mental note to wave specifically at the woman, who had clearly put considerable effort into her coronation outfit. As they continued their procession, Kate began to notice individual faces in the crowd, rather than just the overwhelming mass of people. There was an elderly woman with tears streaming down her cheeks, a young father lifting his toddler onto his shoulders for a better view, a group of teenagers taking selfies with the royal family in the background. "This is what it's all about," William said quietly, following her gaze toward the diverse crowd of people who had gathered to share in this historic moment. All these people, all these stories, all connected by this shared experience. Louis had discovered that if he waved with extra enthusiasm, certain sections of the crowd would cheer louder, and he had begun experimenting with different waving techniques to see which ones generated the biggest responses. His scientific approach to crowd engagement was amusing his parents while delighting the spectators. The security team was managing the crowd expertly, allowing for meaningful interaction while maintaining appropriate safety distances. Kate could see the subtle signals they used to communicate with each other, the careful positioning that kept escape routes clear while maximizing public access. A woman near the barriers called out, "Princess Kate, you look beautiful," and Kate made sure to wave directly at her with a warm smile. These personal moments of connection were what made the formal requirements of royal duty feel worthwhile. "Thank you," Kate called back, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. George had been observing his parents' interactions with the crowd and was beginning to attempt similar engagements himself. When a young boy about his own age held up a sign reading "Future King George," he gave a special wave and even managed a small smile. "He's learning," William noted with satisfaction, watching his eldest son begin to master the delicate balance between approachability and dignity that royal public appearances required. The final stretch toward their vehicles was lined with some of the most enthusiastic spectators of the day. Many had been waiting for hours in the same spots, and their excitement had reached fever pitch as the royal family approached. Charlotte had spotted a group of girl guides in their uniforms and was already planning her route toward them. "Can I go say hello to those girls, Mummy?" she asked. Just for a moment, Kate agreed, knowing that such interactions were often the highlights of these events for both the royal family and the public. As Charlotte made her brief detour to greet the girl guides, their excited squeals and her genuine pleasure at meeting them created one of those spontaneous moments that no amount of planning could orchestrate. Kate watched with maternal pride as her daughter handled the interaction with natural grace and obvious enjoyment. The cars were now just a few steps away, marking the end of this particular phase of their Coronation Day experience. But Kate knew that the images, sounds, and emotions of these moments would stay with all of them for years to come. The drive back to Buckingham Palace felt different from their morning journey to Westminster Abbey. The nervous anticipation had been replaced by a sense of accomplishment and shared joy, though Kate could see that the children were beginning to show signs of the mental and physical exhaustion that came from hours of maintaining perfect behavior under intense public scrutiny. Prince Louis had curled up against his mother's side, his formal composure finally giving way to the natural fatigue of a 5-year-old who had been asked to sit still and be perfect for far longer than his usual attention span would normally allow. Kate stroked his hair gently, grateful that he had managed to exceed all expectations throughout the day. "You were all absolutely wonderful today," William said to the children, his voice filled with genuine pride and perhaps a touch of relief. "I know it wasn't easy to concentrate for such a long time, but you represented our family beautifully." Charlotte was still buzzing with excitement from her interactions with the crowd, particularly her brief conversation with the girl guides. "Did you see how happy they were, Mummy? The one girl said she wants to be a princess when she grows up, just like me." Kate smiled at her daughter's innocent enthusiasm, remembering her own childhood dreams and how different reality had turned out to be from those early fantasies. "I'm sure you made her day very special," she replied warmly. George was staring out the window at the crowds that still lined their route back to the palace. Even after hours of celebration, people remained stationed along the streets, hoping for one more glimpse of the royal family. His expression was thoughtful, almost philosophical for someone so young. "Papa, do you think they'll remember today when they're old like Granny was?" George asked, referring to his great-grandmother with the casual way children spoke about profound things. William considered the question seriously, as he always did when one of his children asked something meaningful. "I think they'll remember it for the rest of their lives," he said. "Just like we will." Today was the kind of day that becomes part of history, part of the story people tell their children and grandchildren. The palace came into view ahead of them, its familiar facade now decorated with additional flags and bunting for the coronation celebrations. Kate could see crowds gathered in front of the gates and extending down the mall, all waiting for the traditional balcony appearance that would cap off the day's events. "Are we going to wave from the balcony now?" Charlotte asked, perking up at the sight of the palace. "In a little while," Kate replied. "First, we'll have a few minutes to rest and make sure everyone looks perfect for the photographs." The cars pulled into the palace courtyard, away from the public eye for the first time in hours. Kate felt a moment of profound relief at being in a private space again, even though she knew their public duties for the day were far from over. As they stepped out of the vehicles, Louis immediately stretched his arms above his head and let out a long sigh. "My legs were getting very tired from sitting so nicely," he announced, making his parents laugh. "You did brilliantly, darling," Kate said, lifting him briefly for a hug before setting him back down. "I'm so proud of how patient you were." Inside the palace, they were greeted by staff members who had been monitoring the day's events on television. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The ceremony had been flawless, the public response enthusiastic, and the children's behavior exemplary. "The reaction on social media has been incredible," one aide informed them quietly, particularly the children's interactions with the crowd. "Charlotte's moment with the Girl Guides is already being shared thousands of times." Kate felt a familiar mix of pride and protectiveness when it came to her children's public exposure. While she was pleased that they had connected so well with people, she was always conscious of the need to balance their public roles with their need for normal childhood experiences. They were given a brief respite to refresh themselves before the balcony appearance. Kate took the opportunity to check the children's appearances, smoothing wrinkles from their outfits and ensuring that their hair still looked presentable after the long day. "Do I look all right, Mummy?" George asked, checking his reflection in a palace mirror with the same careful attention to detail she had observed in him all day. "You look perfect, sweetheart," she assured him, "like a future king should look." The words hung in the air for a moment, both of them aware of their significance. George nodded solemnly, seeming to understand that today had been as much about his future as it had been about the present moment. Charlotte was practicing her waves in front of another mirror, experimenting with different techniques she had observed other members of the royal family using throughout the day. Her natural performative instincts were serving her well in her royal role. Louis had found a comfortable chair and was swinging his legs while examining his formal shoes, which had clearly begun to pinch his feet after the long day. "These shoes are very shiny, but not very comfortable," he observed with typical 5-year-old honesty. "Comfortable shoes aren't always the most appropriate for special occasions," William explained gently. "But as soon as we're done with the balcony appearance, you can change into your regular shoes." The time came to make their way to the famous balcony overlooking the mall. Kate could hear the roar of the crowd even from inside the palace, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the ancient walls of the building. "Ready for one more public appearance?" William asked his family as they approached the doors leading to the balcony. The children nodded, their earlier fatigue temporarily forgotten in the excitement of what was traditionally the climax of any major royal celebration. Kate took one final moment to ensure everyone looked perfect, knowing that the images from the balcony appearance would be the ones most remembered from the day. "Remember," she said softly, "big smiles and enthusiastic waves. This is their reward for waiting so patiently all day." The doors opened, and they stepped out onto the balcony to thunderous cheers from the thousands of people gathered below. The sight was breathtaking, a sea of faces extending as far as the eye could see, all turned upward toward the palace with expressions of joy and celebration. Charlotte immediately began waving with both hands, her natural exuberance perfectly suited to the moment. George stood straight and dignified, his waves measured and royal. Louis, after a moment of being overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle, began copying his siblings with growing enthusiasm. "Look how many people came to celebrate with us," Kate said to the children, though her voice was nearly lost in the cheering crowd. As they stood together on that historic balcony, Kate felt a profound sense of completion. The day that had begun with nervous anticipation had transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. They had successfully navigated one of the most important days in recent British history, and in doing so, had created memories that would last a lifetime. The crowd below continued to cheer and wave, their enthusiasm undimmed after hours of celebration. In that moment, Kate understood that they had all been part of something larger than themselves, a shared experience that had brought together people from all walks of life in celebration of tradition, continuity, and hope for the future. As the sun began to set over London, casting a golden glow over the celebrating crowds, Kate knew that this coronation day would be remembered not just as a historic event, but as a perfect example of the enduring bond between the royal family and the people they served.